Alright, Section 10, Cooling System, Water Temperature, Cooling Solution, Piping, Description, and Installation, Water Leaks, After Cooler, Description, Removal, Cleaning, or Core Replacement, Installation, Water Pumps, Description, Removal, Housing, Drive Gear, Shaft Bearing, Assembly, Impeller, Removal, Seal, Removal, Application Bearing, Removal, Shaft Bearing, Drive Gear, Assembly, Impeller, Installation, Impeller, Housing, Installation, Pump, Installation, Service Data, and Specification, Installation. Alright, your engine maintenance manual, electric motor, diesel, Section 10, 645 cubic engine cooling system. The description: the engine cooling system consists of the engine driven with a central figure water pumps, replaceable inlet water manifold with the individual jumper line to each liner. Cylinder which a cooling water is circulated with the two central figure water pumps are mounted with accessory drive housing are driven with a governor drive gear. The representative illustration engine cooling system shown figure 10.1. Engine water is circulated with the aftercooler located with the turbocharger disc and arch duct for the cool of the air before it enters the engine air box. Um, the engine discharge water flows through the external cooling system to dispel the heat taken up into the engine. The system consists of water tank, water level gauges, temperature gauge, radiator, and connection pipe. Your maintenance engine water temperature gauges are provided with the cooling system. Visually check the engine water temperature within the recommended limits. Automatic temperature control set or maintain water temperature within set limits. Caution: desirable engine coolant temperature of 120 degrees Fahrenheit. High before fully loaded with applied with the engine. After idling, low ambient temperatures increase to full load level should be made gradually. And it shows your typical cooling system. And a hot engine alarm would indicate with excessive high water the discharge temperature of hot engine water could result from faulty water cooling equipment. Excessive loss of cooling water. In event of a hot engine alarm, the engine load should be reduced to an attempt to attain the normal temperature before resuming operation because of the hot engine water should be found and the engine corrected. Engine cooling solution. Coolant solution composed of water corrosion inhibitor of the necessary of the antifreeze and the selection of the maintenance for the proper coolant solution are necessary to effective efficiency with the cooling system operation. Failure to recognize the importance of these factors or result of the cooling system damage, increase maintenance costs, unnecessary equipment downtime. Coolant samples should be taken with the cooling of the system with analysis for the intervals with specified with a scheduled maintenance program. Cooling system piping description. Figure to figure 10.2 with the piping detailed pumping outlet with the elbows conduct water with the pump to removable water inlet manifolds located with each of the air box. Each manifold is connected to the rear end of the plate. After cooler water inlet pipe with the rear end of the flange of the manifold, equipped with the two seals which prevent the leakage for the air from the air box and the flange to the front end of the manifold to the contact with the outer face of the front end plate with the manifold installed. Each liner is individually supplied with the coolant from the water manifold through the water inlet tube assembly of the deflector of the air. Each liner water inlet diver. The deflector is used at each liner water inlet to divert water, prevent direct and pigment on the inner liner wall. The water enters the cylinder head through 12 discharge holes at the top of the liner. At the counterbore around each hole, it accumulates heat and dam water seal. Water discharge elbow bolted to each cylinder head to provide water passage. Water discharge manifold which extends along the top of the crankcase. The crankcase has two built-in siphon tubes inside of the water discharge manifold. One is located in the second cylinder from the rear end of the right bank, and the other on the second cylinder from the front end of the left bank. When the engine water is drained, this will provide for the engine cooling water drain to event the engine is not level. Maintenance piping installation. After the cylinder head and liner properly installed with the engine, the water inlet manifold liner water inlet tube may be applied. You have your cooling system. Water pump outlet elbow. Manifold connection water inlet tube. Saddle strap. Manifold. And then like cylinder liner. Number 7. Or inspect the water manifold with any of the roughness area with the discharge holes of the front end of the flange plate. The plate flange gasket over the manifold. Insert the manifold into the airbox. Carefully guide the end of the water manifold into the rear end of the plate with it sealed so they are not damaged. When positioned correctly, the manifold should be firmly supported with the end of it and tighten with the manifold to the front of the end of the bolts. Temporary bolts may be used if the water pump discharge elbow is not ready to be applied. Place a new seal over the groove of the liner end of the water inlet tube with a position style strap around the water manifold through the inlet tube flange. After the straps of the nuts have been applied with a tightened finger, tie the check with the seal of the C with the groove of the position tube out of the liner finger of the tightened bolts of the tie. Take the new gasket, shape it and fit it around with the water manifold, and shove the gasket between the two flanges of the manifold, making sure the sides of the gasket are flush with the sides of the flange. Ends of the gasket are within the clamping radius of the flange. Torque the strap of the nuts at 15 foot-pounds of torque 10 prior to torquing the tube of the liner bolts. Remove the bolts and wash it with the flange tube of the bolts. Tube move with the reposition of the water manifold. The movement of the detective of the tube of the liner bolts washer with the maybe or applied torque to 30 foot-pounds of torque. After all the liner water inlet tubes are properly supplied with a manifold securely held and temporary bolts, if applied, should be removed with the water pump discharge elbow connected. Water leaks. If loss of water, the cooling system notice, check for leaking piping, pumping, seal, jumper tube connection, cylinder head discharge elbow in conjunction with the head to the liner. Check for liner and cylinder head cracks. Unless a very obvious location with a crack with the cylinder head of the liner, but the very difficult to find, requires careful examination. Indication of the water leak head of the liner requires removal through the inspection. Inspect the cylinder interior through liner ports. Remove the leak of the enter of the lube oil with the cylinder head of the discharge elbow seal. The seal is to be replaced without the disturbing cylinder head. The provide with the crab, and then the crab remove the water is drained with water contamination, lubricating oil with the necessity of draining the oil before the oil is renewed from the system being flushed. Lube containing contamination best determined in the laboratory of the analysis absence and such means of the following method of checking of the water with the oil may be used. Drop a dip of a gallon of lube oil for the bottom of the engine lube oil sum. Let it stand for 10 minutes and spill about 3/4 of the oil from the container plate for the remaining quarter of the glass bottle. Allow the sample to stand for another 10 minutes. If any water indicated at the bottom of the bottle, it's recommended that the lube oil system be drained and flushed. Replaced with new oil after surface contamination is eliminated. Or your aftercooler in description. An aftercooler is located each side with a turbocharger with the air entering each of the bank of the engine with the cool the air compressed with the turbocharger, reduce the temperature of the air, which increases the air density, improve the engine operator efficiency. The aftercooler's heat exchange with the box-like construction consists of a tube nest through which the water circulates with the aids of the transfer of the heat with the compressed air entering the engine air box of the engine. The aftercoolers receive the water directly from the discharge of the engine water pump of the water leaving the aftercoolers is piped to the engine discharge manifold. The now valves are located with the aftercooler piping, and so cooling water is provided whenever there is engine running. Alright, maintenance. When the engine shut down, the interior inspection of the engine aftercooler will usually detect any of the sign of the core leakage, if evidence of leakage necessity removal of the aftercooler. Check the aftercooler plugging that may be made with the removing the two mounting bolts of the fifth from the top of the cuff of the aftercooler, applying with the hose with the water manometer with the bolts of the engine shut down idle speed. Do not remove the hose of the engine high speed. Do not apply remove with the hose signally. When the engine is full speed, with or without load, the maximum allowable depression across the aftercooler is listed. So the aftercooler should be removed and cleaned at the intervals specified in the scheduled maintenance program. After draining engine water, disconnect the water discharge vent line flange at the top of the aftercooler. Loosen the water inlet at the bottom of the aftercooler. Remove the mounting bolt. Secure the aftercooler air duct with both of the fronting of the jack and roll the fronting and the back of the free assembly jack and screw the aftercooler flange of the break of the joint with the after duct and aftercooler. When the aftercooler is sufficiently free, applying the aftercooler lifting tool, use a suitable hoist to remove the entire assembly from the air duct. Cleaning. Do not use caustitic cleaning or aluminum core fins will do damage. Cleaning procedure should be in accordance with the accepted practice with recommended with the supply of the cleaning material. Figure 10.3 shows the aftercooler lifting device. Your core replacement. In the event of the aftercooler is removed due to the leaking of the core may be replaced using the following procedure. Gasket used aftercooler assembly should be prepared advanced assembly being soaked with American Society testing material number 3 in 15 minutes after a temperature of 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Soaking of the gasket should remove the permanent of the draining before using. Place the core of the workbench and apply with the core cover gasket cover. Apply the cover bolts and tighten to 35 foot-pounds of the center bolt out of the end bolt. Invert assembly and apply with the header to the core gasket header. Apply the header to the core bolt, tighten then from the center bolt to the end bolt of the tighten the bolts at 35 foot-pounds. After assembly has been completed, blank the oil flange except for one. Apply any of the air test arrangement of the rating flange. Within 50 psi air pressure for the water and passage of the core, submerge the assembly into the water and check for leaks. After the water test, check the torque of the header of the cover of the bolts at 35 pounds. Installation: check the air duct and the aftercooler mounting surfaces. Make certain that there are no nicks and roughness on the areas. Apply a support pad to the backplate dowels of the aftercooler, figure 10-4, with the gasket in the position outside of the contact of the air duct. Figure 10 shows the support pads to the dowel installation. Apply aftercool air duct gasket over the two guide dowels using the after limiting of the two hoists. Install the aftercooler in the end duct. Line up the support pad bolts of the figure 10-5 at the backing of the air duct and apply with the do not tighten the support pad bolts. Correctly position aftercooler flange over the air duct and assembly flange holes. Apply with the tightened bolts holding aftercooler to the air duct. When aftercooler flange bolts have been tightened the support pad bolts at back of the air duct. Figure 10-5, 130 foot-pounds of lock wire. Alright, your water pump description: 2 engine cooling water pumps, 1 8-cylinder with after self-oiling, self-draining central figure poles. Rotate the opposite of the direction of the engine crankshaft. The components of the water pump are identified in figure 10-7. 10-5 air duct and support pad application show the aftercooler dowel, the gasket, support pad, air duct, air aftercooler, and the engine air plate. The water pump installation pumps are carried under two-part numbers identified with the right and left bank pumps. So the only difference between the right and left bank pumps is the position of the impeller housing in relation to the pump shaft housing. Position of the impeller housing may be changed on either pump to permit use of the opposite bank. The pump drive shaft is separated with the main pump using the two ball bearings separated with the seal space of the bearings. Receive lubricating oil with the engine oil system drill passage in the pump housing. Outer bearing adjoins with the water slinger bearing against the shoulder of the staff. The inner bearing is held in the plate for the retainer and the snap ring and absorbs the thrust in the shaft of the pump driver. That is key with the pump shaft, the budding, the inner bearing held in the one shaft of the washer nut. Your stationary bushing figure 10-7 applied with the drive of the shaft housing and the carbon seal assembly. Figure 10-8 faces against the smooth inner surface of the shaft held in the spring. Any water leak past the seal is indicated with the telltale drain. The drive shaft housing will permanent runoff to prevent water from reaching the engine side of the pump. Figure 10-8 shows the spring seal assembly, spring shaft, the seal, the shell, the rubber outlet seal, and the carbon inner seal. This shows the water pump cross section. The impeller is key with the pump shaft and secure with the washer and nut, with the enclosed with the impeller housing and assemble the main pump with the housing of the 8-sided nuts. Maintenance: pump removal. Drain the cooling system, remove the water pump inlet connection, disconnect the pump discharge flange connection, remove the mounting bolts of the pump from the engine, house, driving gear and shaft, the bearing assembly and impeller removal, remove the nut securing impeller housing to the pump support housing, assemble the thread pressure plate with a figure 10-9 with the hydraulic ram head. 3. Place the socket end of the ram adapter over the nut securing the impeller shaft to adapt the bottoms out of the impeller. Secure pressure plate with the impeller housing with the 1 2/3 13 by 1 1/2 hex head bolts, ensuring the ram head is aligned with the machine end of the adapter. And then it shows 10-10 shows the driver gear removal. Operating hydraulic jam and hydraulic ram and impeller housing separated with the pump supported housing. Impeller housing removal, the impeller housing mounting nuts, impeller housing adapter, pressure plate, hydraulic ram head mounting bolts adapter. Place the mounting flange pump with the device having the jaw protectors. Remove the drive gear and nut washer using block of wood to prevent impeller movement. Then move the impeller with the nut washing and the impeller gear with a puller. Figure 10-10. Remove the pump drive gear and key. Remove snap ring and bearing retainer ring. Figure 10-7. Place the extension tip of the impeller puller over the shaft thread impeller end of the pump. 12. Apply this impeller puller over which will be placed behind the support and housing. Figure 10-11. Impeller removal, and then it shows the apply the wrench to the nut part of the tool of the drum until the shaft of the bearing assembly is free of the pump, then remove the impeller. Remove the application of the pump seal removal. After the impeller removal, we remove the spring seal assembly. Figure 10-7. Use the care to prevent the damage to stationary bushing seal surface. Remove the bolts with the stationary bushing in the event with the bushing is not easily removed. Insert the 3/8 by 2-inch bolt in the puller hole. Provided with the bushing, force the bushing out of the housing. Sometimes the bushing may be loosened by tapping on the bushing flange with a rawhide mallet, allowing the removal using puller bolts. Your seal application. Clean the stationary bushing and pump shaft. Clean the seal surface with the stationary bushing with the absolute smooth, flat, preventing wear of the carbon washer. Stationary bushing having the rough surface must be replaced with the new bushing. Before applying stationary bushing, be sure the bushing and the mounting surface of the clean. Form material that can cover the bushing to interfere with the effective sealing. And also be sure the smooth, flat carbon seal surface of the bushing is clean and dry with applying the new stationary bushing in the gasket of the bushing. Tighten the bolts evenly with a torque of 100 inch-pounds. After playing with the stationary bushing, check the run out with the carbon seal surface using the indicator mounted with the end of the pump of the shaft. With the run out limit is exceeds the reposition the bushing 180 degrees off the scrape off the mounting of the surface in the area with a high reading. Install the new assembly figure 10A with apply the carbon inner sealing the narrow end of the contacting the stationary bushing. Check the carbon face for cleanliness and apply rubber outer sealing with the shell with apply the carbon seal to the cars. Over the shell with having the slots for the carbon seal with the one end of the driving spring fits and shell while the other end must be fitted within the slot with the bottom of the impeller when it's assembled. Alright, bearing removal. Place the shaft of the bearing assembly with the arbor to press with the remove of the bearing. The bearing and the impeller with the end that has been remained with the housing when shaft will remove. The clean inspection part for the defect with the replace for the damaged part of the bearings with the with the seals and shields out of the both sides with the wipe clean with the butt not washed. Inspect the bearings with excessive end play with the roughness of the seasoned, gouged, worn, abraded surfaces, broken, bent seals and shields, fractured outer races, bottom shield, shaft seals, contact surfaces must be smooth. See surface data at the end of the section of the wear limits. Alright, shaft bearing and drive gear. Assembly the water slinging outer bearing space for the inner bearing with the pump shaft and making sure for the rear bearing with the retainer ring of the position correctly with the retainer ring to the outside. These parts are some of the figure 10 7 the slinger next to the should end of the shaft of the concave the side toward the impeller end followed with the outer bearing without the retainer in space and the inner bearing will be abutting each other. Snugly the seal sides of the bearing go toward the outer end of the assembly being distinguished with the seal side of the bearing protruding slightly beyond the outer race. Protect the drive shaft housing with the vise for the jaw with the protection for clean the dirt out of the support housing outboard with the outer reef, the outboard bearing. Apply the thin coating with a silicone rubber sealing with the compound with the housing outboard. Insert of the shaft of the bearing assembly slinger for the first for the drive gear of the housing. Raw head mallet lightly tap the assembly until the lines enter the first bearing of the bore and continue tapping the assembly until it is properly seated within the housing. Apply the bearing retainer snap bearing back off the rear bearing. Place the key and shaft of the assembly with the drive gear with the shaft using rawhide mallet. Check the check the shaft key with the keyway fit with the check of the pump shaft. The diameter of the gear bore was fit with the maximum limit. With the inspector gear with the nut insert with any size of the disintegration nuts may be reused. Fiber collar drag of 92 inches pound. Gear nut at 260 foot-pounds. Place the seal assembly with the previously described. Alright, you're installing the impeller, figure 10 12 show the impeller installer beginning to assemble the impeller drive shaft housing, threaded bush and screw down with the pump shaft threads, but then by turning outer portion of the installer tool, the impeller is pressed into position. Care must be taken and strap the impeller straight on the shaft to see if the key in the keyway area line before the impeller is brought to all the way down. Check with the underside of the see that seal spring and spring in the slot under the impeller to finish of the impeller application. So it shows your impeller installer with the installer the pump installer. Check the inserter with the impeller shaft nut that is free for the tears of the disintegration. Nuts may be reused for fiber drag at 32 inch pounds. Apply to impeller retaining washer with the nut with the torque value with the impeller nut at the 850 foot-pounds. Installing impeller housing. Check with the drill drain pipe passage free with the obstruction. Determine whether the pump is to be used on the right or left flank of the engine since the impeller housing with the position differently in each case. An arrow indicated cast of the bottom of the pump shaft of the housing with the impeller housing lettered R with the R for the right bank and assembled the impeller with the housing with the R with the opposite for the arrow with the showing housing for the left bank pump L for the opposite area of the also shown figure 1013. Install housing with the correct position. Use the new gasket in between the impeller and the shaft housing. Apply housing nut studs and tighten to 60 foot-pounds of torque. Our figure 1013 shows your pump housing position, pump part number, and the front end of the engine, left hand, right hand, installing pump, and the pumps are installed with the position shown in figure 1013 with the right and left bank of the torque of the value of the pump and accessory cover mounting of the 65 foot bolts. Part number of the pump is located at the end of the plate attached to the pump discharge flange as shown in figure 1013. Should also be noted that the pump insulation water inlet elbow with the proper one is listed in the parts books of the engine installation. When installation of the water pump, care should be taken with the application of the water inlet connection. This connection consists of a sleeve synthetic rubber seal retainers, bolted clamps. And then your service data cooling system, these will be posted in the reading file. And this was section 10, your cooling system for your engine maintenance manual of the 645 electric motor diesel general maintenance GM.